are you real concerned about this global warming?
I'm only concerned about the incredible frenzy and hype for something that's a total myth. That concerns me a lot, because people are going hysterical about it. It's amazing to me how upset so many people are, and how many billions of dollars apparently our governments are going to spend of our tax dollars to combat something that isn't real. That has my attention, believe me. As a scientist, I know that global warming doesn't really exist at all in any sense of significance, and that we have nothing to worry about.
Now, are you saying that there hasn't even been any warming of the...
Well, there's absolutely natural climate fluctuations. We have little ice ages, we have warm-ups. Historically, the Earth has vacillated through all of these. Solar cycles change dramatically. Ocean currents change. And all of that has a significant impact on climate. And the building of cities, the flying of airplanes, the existence of all these billions of people on Earth have all influenced the climate of Earth. But none of it is of significance. And thank goodness, things are doing just fine.
So you're not in a panic over the icebergs melting and the sea levels rising? And
I promise you, 20 years from today, I'll be the one that's laughing. The icebergs, the ice caps at the poles are not going to melt. The oceans are not going to flood the coast. People are not going to die. We're not going to have global climate change that cuts off the food supply. We're not going to have thousands of species eliminated as they lose their habitat. None of these things is going to happen. The Earth is going to, the climate's going to change with cycles of the sun and with ocean currents, and we're all going to do just fine.
But Al Gore has a very convincing video out there that seems to show that we're really facing a catastrophe.
I'm very well aware of the hype. The media is full of it every day. Al Gore got the Nobel Peace Prize, an Oscar, and a Grammy, and apparently millions of dollars. Al Gore, I believe, is sincere in his belief, but oh so misguided, as is the entire UN IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Well, doesn't that bring us to the point that Mr. Gore makes, and many others, that science has spoken? There is a universal consensus among scientists.
Well, if you look at the history of the IPCC, it was formed by people whose agendas were of question. And they really wanted to get back at the industrialized nations and get them to pay penance to the third world nations for their pollution of the atmosphere through their industrial activities. It was the little guys picking on the big guys kind of concept, which is very common in the UN. And it was from people who had world government in mind. That history is pretty well documented by an engineer named Alan Cheatham. He has really dug into it. And that panel was, so you create this bureau within the UN on climate change. Well, its mission and its existence then is to prove that there's climate change. So it starts hiring scientists and giving them research money to go out and prove that its mission is valid, to prove its point. And all of this, and then it holds meetings and it does publicity, and the whole thing just crescendos and builds. Now, was there a consensus of 2,500 scientists at the Bali meeting? Heavens, no. The key paragraphs or chapters of this report and the research documents behind it, which are very impressive, are not anything that were widely read by these scientists. They were, many of them were political scientists, as it were scientists who have a political mission. Representatives there from Greenpeace and the Sierra Club and from government ministries, in addition to some well-meaning scientists. But it appears that only about 25 scientists out of that 2,500 actually read and reviewed in a scientific manner, a peer review, the key chapter on radiative forcing by carbon dioxide causing climate change. So there was no huge consensus built up at the IPCC, and there's almost more scientific consensus on the other side, where 19,000 scientists signed a petition against the Kyoto Protocol, where 400 plus scientists spoke out as skeptics on global warming in 2007, where at least 4 dozen TV meteorologists have spoken out against global warming. There's no consensus, and to try to shut off the debate is a political strategy. One of the great things about science is the debate that takes place, and the debate should never be shut off.
It's my understanding that at Valley, in November of 2007 at the conference there, that quite a number of scientists who went there in order to engage in debate there were not allowed to have any kind of forum there.
There were 100 scientists who wrote a letter of complaint at the meeting. That was one group that spoke up, and we have documentation and statements and papers by any number of scientists who were on the IPCC panel, who were reviewers and had been with it for years, who shared in that Nobel Peace Prize, because the panel shared the prize with Al Gore, who shared in that prize, who say that this panel should be disbanded, should be, that it's a sham.
Because a lot of the scientists who participated in the panel actually providing scientific input,
it was ignored.
Where then later their scientific work was basically shoved aside for political.
They asked questions, they made comments, and essentially it was pushed aside, ignored. And that is not the scientific process, obviously.
Now, you were involved in the middle of your career in broadcasting 20, 30 years ago when we were told in similar panic terms that we were going to face global cooling and ice age.
I was a TV weathercaster in Chicago when the head of the Department of Meteorology at the University of Wisconsin announced the coming of an ice age. And Time magazine came out with a picture of the skyscrapers of Chicago trapped in a huge glacier that was creeping down over the Midwest. And clearly, as a television meteorologist, I was called upon, I was working for ABC at the time, I was called upon to report on this and to investigate it and to interview people and to, so yeah, I was there. Yeah, and
the ice. You're still waiting for the ice cap.
I never believed it was coming, nor do I believe global warming is coming. And in fact, are you aware? And I'm sure some people seeing this are aware that officials of both the Canadian and Russian government in the past 6 weeks have warned of a coming ice age.
It's my understanding, and this other scientists have been looking at this, pointing out the connection between our weather and the solar activity.
Yeah, this has to do with what's known as a Mater minimum, where the sun goes into hibernation, as they describe it, where the number of solar flares diminishes to zero and the sun lays quiet. And clearly, the sun is the source of all energy on Earth. Nothing happens here without the sun. Without the sun, it's all over. And so how bright the sun shines is a key element. And you and I were taught in school of the solar constant, a figure that represented the energy arriving at Earth from the sun, as though it were a consistent light bulb burning. Well, it's not that at all, of course. It's a great ball of hydrogen exploding in atomic fusion, and this great mass of fire has a lifetime to it, and it has ups and downs. It is not uniform, and it burns irregularly, and it throws off huge amounts of radioactive materials at times, and at other times it lays quieter. And which side of the sun is facing toward Earth at the time of these events has a lot to do with the energy received at Earth. And so all of this is the controlling factor of the climate on Earth. And if you plot the temperatures of Earth, the ice ages and the warm spells, the medieval warm period and so on, and you plot those all out as best we can reproduce them. But we didn't have thermometers for so long. Now we only had thermometers for a couple hundred years, and they're not very accurate. And where you put the thermometer is pretty important too. But let's say you do the best you can from tree rings or whatever other samples you get from ice cores or whatever, and you try to get the long-term temperatures of Earth. And then you compare that to your best record of solar cycles. They seem to lie together. So as goes the sun, so goes the Earth. I think that's pretty clear. It's daddy.
And there are many scientists who view the very minor increase in temperature we have had experienced in more recent times, not with alarm, but suggest that that is a benefit.
Well, there is, if you live in Canada or Minnesota, you might feel that a little global warming would be a wonderful thing. And I think you have a strong point. What is the right temperature for planet Earth? What is our ideal climate regime? Is it what we have had for the last 50 years? Or is it something warmer or colder than that? I would tend to think a few degrees warmer might be a very good thing. And you indicate that indeed we have had a warming. I guess the preponderance of evidence might lead to best suggest that we might have had a degree, 0.2 of warming over the last 30 years or 40 years. But that's vague, and it's hard to pin down. Because during this period of time, these great cities have built up. And urban heat islands are very real. So if you have a thermometer in the city, its temperature has definitely climbed. But the thermometers in the countryside around that city haven't increased, and significantly, if at all. And so it depends which thermometers you're reading. And we've even discovered that they used to whitewash the little shelters, the little white boxes with the louvers on the side that had the weather thermometers in them. And then they started painting them with latex paint. It's about a degree difference between whitewash and latex. Thank you. I mean, this isn't easy stuff now.
So there's a lot of variables here.
Absolutely.
Even if we have, say we have granted a 1 degree increase, and even that is not certain, or somewhere in that neighborhood, how does that compare with other periods in history? We've had larger increases, have we not?
Oh, of course. Around 1900, the Northwest Passage was clear of ice. We had a warm spell. We had the little ice age, that preceded that by about 300 years. Remember that Greenland was settled by the Norsemen when the coast of Greenland were fertile and clear and beautiful farming country, and they established farms that operated there for more than 100 years. Those same coasts that are now covered in ice, and where the ice is reportedly melting now, and the alarmists are screaming about it as though it's some catastrophe. There's these ups and downs.
In previous warming periods, we don't have any great evidence of species extinction or what?
Well, take the polar bear, for instance. There's so much talk about the polar bear today. Excuse me? Polar bear made it through all of that. The polar bears have existed through all this time, despite the fact the Eskimos were hunting them for food and clothing. They are the lifeblood of the Eskimo nation. They need the meat, they need the fur, they need the hides. Polar bears are part of their existence. They're they're the food cycle. And despite the changes in climate, despite the Eskimos, the polar bears have lasted through all of this time. And now there's this incredible alarm about the polar bears because Al Gore stood in front of a picture of a polar bear on a piece of ice floating in the ocean and decried the death of the polar bear. Well, the polar bear, that picture was phony to start with. It was taken by a scientist on a research vessel that was up examining ice, and the polar bears were over on the mainland. They were very curious about that boat and those people. They'd never seen anything like that in their lives, so they jumped on this ice floe and floated out to see it. Maybe they thought they were going to eat the scientist off the boat. I don't know. But then when they were through having their look-see, they jumped in the water and swam back to the shore. Now, no polar bears died in that, and I think it is horrible fraud to take that picture, which was taken from that scientist without permission, and to turn that into a emotional plea to people who love polar bears. That is so unfair. And those polar bears are, the people who really keep track say there are more polar bears living on Earth today than there have been in recent years. About 25,000.
What about the concerns that many people have about increased tsunamis and hurricanes as a result of?
Well, it's ridiculous.